I grew up in Roxbury. I'm still living in Roxbury right now. And that's a big part of my experience as an artist. Because many people may not know this, but Boston is home to a very beautiful tradition of public art. And there's a very supportive and brilliant Black artist community here in Boston. I loved cartoons. I loved video games. I loved all of these different types of media. And then also growing up in a city where public art was so important. So walking around my neighborhood, walking around my community and seeing murals. I remember I talked about the experience of going to a shop in Roxbury called, they would sell greeting cards, they would sell prints by Black artists, and looking at these artists who were sort of creating this work, talking about Black identity and also thinking about this connection between Africa and the diaspora. So I credit a lot of the nerdy things that I liked as a kid and I still like now, as well as this public art that I just sort of grew up experiencing as a person. So I very much consider myself an illustrator now, even though I'm working more in the realm of fine arts. I also move back and forth between the two. So I very much still identify as an illustrator position because basically what I was thinking about was I'm interested in telling these particular types of stories, but there's also a huge focus on materiality and sort of like these experiential elements of the work, because even though, you know, the images that you're seeing now have a very different resonance on the screen, I'm also thinking what it looks like to experience them in real life. How does that relay certain ideas that are inherent to the work? And what does it look like to create worlds? World building is a huge part of my work and my practice. So with my work, what I'm really interested in doing is really challenging the idea of Western white supremacist universalisms. So this idea that there is this one possible way in which you can construct the world that is situated away by default. So my work, it's claiming that this world is as rich and as complex and as generative as any other. And by saying that, you are allowed to imagine something outside of this white supremacist system. And it gives you a space to understand that this is a world that was fabricated. It is a world that was created. It is a world which comes out of, you know, transatlantic slavery and colonialism. It's something which is constructed. It is not something that is a given. And it also is something that is like immutable. I was always really interested in that because, you know, in terms of Yoruba religion and philosophy, there's these grand pantheons of deities and this incredibly rich and complex worldview and these very deep, complex interactions between these deities that play out in a very rich body of very well-recorded oral literature. So when I had the opportunity to actually travel to Nigeria and to learn not only about traditional weaving, wood carving, dyeing, but also to have the opportunity to interview and have conversations with people, it very much enriched my knowledge of that world sense, but also helped me understand the deep complexity of those religious ideas and those philosophical ideas. And learning that while also learning these art forms also helped me understand how intertwined these ideas are and how deeply tied to like the fabric of existence like these forms of verbal artistry and also these physical art forms are. So this piece is called Worshippers of the Water Spirit, and it was exploring gender and gender power and African religion and philosophy, and also looking at African art history and iconography. You know, symbols of water spirits, snakes, pythons are very much associated with water spirits. Fish, specifically mudfish, which are able to breathe air, are often associated with water spirits. And this, the central figure is based off of images showing the worship of a West African deity that's very much associated with trade with the West, with European, associated with the wealth that comes from that Atlantic trade, a very complex deity. So this like ambivalence and this complexity, which is also tied to gender, as water is oftentimes associated with like feminine power and agency. Water spirits oftentimes embody this type of femininity, but they can also embody sort of like this assertive and like masculine power and tendencies. Water is, you know, understood as something which is nurturing and life-giving, but also something that has the potential for being destructive and life-taking.
Hmm.
It's called Omo Batala, he who sleeps in white and awakens in white. That's one of the praise names for Obatala, who's the god of the Orisha, king of the white cloth. He was remembered as a very knowledgeable priest. The patterns that you're seeing there, that guloche pattern, that intertwining pattern, is something you see in a lot of different African artistic traditions, especially in wood carvings in Yoruba land. And the cloth that I painted on is a mixture of canvas and also hand woven cloth. So the pattern that I'm weaving into the fabric is made with like white supplemental wefts on a white ground. And what you're seeing there, which is like the tufting, is something that you see on baby carriers in Yoruba land, but it's also something that you see on a lot of our religious textiles in Yoruba land. And also thinking again about that sort of rich symbolism, which is tied to the worship of Obatala, who, you know, is a deity that's associated with creation, but also is a deity that reflects coolness and
Hmm.
mindfulness. So the idea of sleeping in white and awakening in white is an exercise in mindfulness, because this idea of being able to go to sleep wearing white and for your white garments to continue to be white when you wake up. So there is a sense of that also in that sort of like meditative practice, but also this idea of, you know, spiritual cleanliness and